Alright, so in this video we're going to take a look at how to actually copy the contents of one array into another without necessarily copying just the reference to the array. So to start off with, I'm going to go ahead and make a new program or new project for this. We're going to go ahead and write out the sort of naive approach to this at first, where we're going to be copying the array. I'll then talk a little bit conceptually about what's going on there and what we want to do to fix that, and then come back to the code to show how to go about implementing the correct approach to copy the contents of one array into the other. So we'll go ahead and make our new project, new program. For this one, I'm going to call this array copy.java. So then I have our public class. Call this array copy. We'll have a main method, so we'll do public static void main, our string of arguments. And for this one, what we're going to go ahead and do is create two integer arrays. So I'm going to create one, I'm going to call it nums, and say this is equal to some set of values, say something like 5, 6, and 7. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a second integer array. I'll call this nums2, and this one's going to be equal to nums. So the idea here is that I want to be able to just take nums and assign that to nums2 to essentially create two arrays with the contents 5, 6, and 7. Unfortunately, there's a bit of an issue with doing it this way. So I'll go ahead and show you real quick what happens that makes this a problem by modifying the contents of just one of these arrays. So right now we've got essentially two arrays with the values 5, 6, and 7 in them. I want to go ahead and change one of these. So I'm going to go ahead and take my first array nums, and I'm going to change the value right here to something like 8. Okay. I'll then go ahead and create a for loop. So we're going to start from 0, so I have index 0. This will keep going for as long as index is less than nums.length. And we'll also go ahead and do index plus plus. And we'll go ahead and print out the phrase at position plus our index plus our colon plus nums index. Okay, so this is going to print out the values for each position of this first array. So I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick, and we'll run it and just see that it's been changed right here. So we're going to have the values 5, 8, and 7. So I'll do java array copy.java. I'll then go ahead and run it. And we see we've got at position 0 the value 5, at position 1 the value 8, and at position 2 the value 7. Okay, so this is the change that I made to nums. We'll also go ahead and take a look at nums2. So for that one, since we didn't change anything in that one, we're expecting the values 5, 6, and 7 for that. So I'm going to go ahead and copy what I have right here, since it's going to look almost identical. A few key changes. They're going to have the same length, but just for its own sake, we're going to say nums2.length here. And then right here, I just want to go ahead and print out each element at each position of nums2. So we're going to change the little spot right there. Okay, so the expectation is that we're going to have 5, 8, and 7 for nums1, and then 5, 6, and 7 for nums2. So we'll go ahead and compile that, and then we'll run it. Okay, so we've still got our 5, 8, and 7 for the first array, but there's a little bit of an issue on the second array, which is that it also says 5, 8, and 7. So even though we didn't change this value at this position for the second array, for some reason this value still changed anyway, and it seems to be because of the fact that we changed it on this one. So I'm going to take a moment now to kind of conceptually show you exactly what's going on there. So on the one side, we've got our variables. So I mentioned before that there are two parts when it comes to creating a variable for an object. this reference variable that we create is going to be something that points to or references the object that is located somewhere else in memory. So in this case, we've got two of these, nums and nums2. Adjust the size for this. We want nums, and we want nums2. And then, in addition to these two references, we have just one single object somewhere in memory, which is the array that we created. So we'll go ahead and create this one array. We have a size of 3 for it. And we've got our different positions for it. So we're going to have things like position 0, 1, and 2. And at each one of these positions, initially we had the values 5, 6, and 7. Okay. And then up here, we have these two references. So we've got both of these that essentially point to this array. So the problem that we're running into is because of the fact that these both point to, or they both reference the same array, when we change this value here, we changed it from 6 to an 8. Both nums and nums2 are going to see this change because they both reference the exact same object. So any modifications that we make to this object, both of these reference variables will always see those changes. So they're not distinct, they're not their own separate objects. So there's a bit of an issue with that, which is that this is very rarely what we intend for this to be doing. Generally, whenever we want to try to make two variables that essentially have the same contents in them, ideally the way that we want to try to approach this is that they're their own separate entities in memory. So ideally the way that we want to do this instead is we want to not have both of these reference the same array, but instead we want to go ahead and create our two reference variables and then also have our own two separate arrays for each of them. Okay. So the general idea is that we're going to create our nums and nums2. And each one of these is going to reference a different array object. Okay. And we'll imagine that each one of these array objects is just going to be that original array of 5, 6, and 7. And then if we make a change to one of these, it does not affect the other. Okay. So we want to look at how we can go about creating it in this way instead of having both of these reference variables pointing to the same object. Okay. So instead of doing this sort of naive approach right here where we just assigned nums to nums2, we want to instead go ahead and create a new array object. So we're going to go ahead and make a new integer array, and we want to specify the size of this integer array to match the size of nums. Since the whole intent here is to just copy all of the contents from it, we also need to make sure that the sizes are the same as well. So we're going to do nums.length here. Okay, so this will create, or at least initially construct, that integer array. And then the next thing we need to do is to go ahead and take the individual items from the first array and add those to the second array. So before I do this little modification here, I'm going to go ahead and include one more for loop. And for this final for loop, we're going to do our int index. We're going to have that start at 0. This is going to go for as long as it's less than nums.length. So in this case, now I'm going to go ahead and use nums.length. We're dealing with both of these arrays in this for loop, but we're also going to make sure that nums2 has the same length as nums. So this is perfectly acceptable now. And we're going to go ahead and do index++. And then right here what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a position in nums2. So say initially we start at nums2 position 0, and I'm going to assign to that whatever value is at the exact same position of nums. So I'm going to take nums and grab the item at the same position. So the very first one, we're going to grab whatever is at position 0 of nums, this value of 5, and we're going to put that into nums2 at that same position. So if we come over here and look at this, so let's say we go ahead and create the 3 items. So when we initially construct this, we've got this empty array for nums2, and we'll specify the positions. So we're going to have position 0, for each of these, position 1 for each of these, and position 2 for each of these. Okay, and then in nums we initialize this, so these 3 values are 5, 6, and 7. And what we want to do is, using this for loop, step through each one of these and move or copy each one of those individual items over to each one of these locations in nums2. Okay. And so then the end result is that we can now have our 5, our 6, and our 7 at each one of these locations. Okay. So we'll go ahead and save that. We'll go ahead and run this again. And now the expectation is that this will do what I had originally described it as doing, which is that position 1 of the nums array will be changed to 8. But when we look at nums2, that will keep just the values 5, 6, and 7. So we'll go ahead and compile this, and we'll run it. And now we can see, looking at the original one, we had 587, 587. For this one now we've got 587 for the first array, and then 567 for the second array. So you can see that we've successfully copied over the contents of the first array without them referencing the same object. So when we modify one, it doesn't affect the other. Okay. So this will wrap up everything for being able to copy arrays. In the next video, we'll take a look at another concept with arrays that's fairly similar in terms of how we're going to go about implementing it, which is being able to compare the contents of 2 arrays.